Hello and welcome to our presentation about phytonutrients, otherwise called phytochemicals. We'll begin with a quote from Hippocrates, who said, "Let your food be your medicine, and your medicine be your food." We want to start out with an overview of the constituents that we have in the food we eat. There are the more commonly known macronutrients, which are our carbohydrates, our proteins, and our fats. There are also micronutrients, which are our vitamins and our minerals, and the vitamins are broken up into fat-soluble vitamins as well as water-soluble vitamins. We also have fiber, which keeps our digestive system cleaned out, and it also creates a home for all of the microflora and bacteria in our digestive system. And then we also have phytochemicals or phytonutrients, which is our topic today. Currently, there are about 25,000 phytochemicals that have been identified, and some researchers believe there might even be up to 250,000 out there. So what are phytonutrients? First of all, the name itself is derived from the word phyto, which means plant simply. There are some other names given to phytochemicals or phytonutrients. They can also be called secondary metabolites or non-essential or conditionally essential nutrients. So these are all phrases that you can look for as you're doing your reading and research. The main purpose of phytochemicals for the plants are communication, protection from pests, and healing. An example of this is illustrated in the picture we have, which is a red poppy which attracts the bee. That color is from a phytochemical, and it is communicating to the bee. Plants also protect from pests by either giving an undesirable flavor, or they can even be toxic or lethal. And an example of a healing phytochemical would be, for example, resin or the sap that plants produce when they are cut. They have many effects on human health. Phytochemicals can be antioxidants, they can affect our metabolism, they can affect our cardiovascular health and cell replication. They can even go down to the very DNA and genetics. They can also be poisons or drugs. An example of this would be the phytochemicals that are found in the foxglove flower, which in themselves can be lethal to humans, but the medical world has extracted those phytochemicals, and we now know them as digoxin, which is a cardiovascular drug. So in summary, phytochemicals are all about color, smell, and taste. When we look at the effects of phytonutrients on human health, we have to keep a few points in mind. First of all, the research is still very active. This is a relatively new topic in research, and we also have to remember that many of the studies are epidemiological in nature, and that means that they study a population of people and find correlations between what the people eat and what their diseases are. This can give a correlation, but it's hard to draw a causation between a specific phytonutrient and a specific disease. So when we look at the research, many of these studies can give us a lot of correlations and connections, but it's hard to draw that cause specifically because of the complexity of our society, of our environment, of our diets, as well as the complexity of the phytonutrients themselves. Another topic to remember when we're looking at these studies is that the nutritional diseases, or the diseases which are affected by our nutrition, are often long latency diseases, and that just means that they take a long time before you actually realize that there's a problem. So you may be deficient in a vitamin or a nutrient for many years before you actually see the effects. And so from that side, it's hard often to trace it back. So we just have to keep this in mind, as well as the epidemiological research in mind when we're looking at the studies and when we're trying to find the relationships between phytonutrients and health issues. To summarize how phytochemicals can work in our bodies, though, they can have antioxidant and detoxifying effects. They affect our metabolism and our insulin regulation. They affect our cardiovascular system. They affect our cell replication and affect cell mutation, which is also known as cancer. They can be hormone precursors and regulators. For example, they work very closely with estrogen and insulin. Those are two well-known effects. They also get down to the DNA and genetics directly inside of our cells. They also can act as poisons or drugs like cocaine, morphine, caffeine. Those are three examples. They also have connections between receptors. For example, in our taste buds and our intestines, there are chemically identical receptors in our taste buds and our intestines, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So a few of the diseases which are directly associated with phytochemicals or phytonutrients, which the research has strongly suggested a correlation for, are cardiovascular disease and stroke, various types of cancers, for example, breast cancer and prostate cancer, even lung cancer, colorectal cancer. Also vision diseases such as cataracts and macular degeneration, diabetes, dementia and Alzheimer's disease, asthma and COPD, and inflammatory diseases and rheumatism. Here's another quote which I think was far ahead of its time. This is from Thomas Edison. He said, "The doctor of the future will give no medication, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." Phytonutrients are found in various amounts in various foods. When we look at science and read up on them, we'll find that they're grouped by colors, by chemical structures, or by functions. They're found in extremely small quantities. Some estimates say that we eat about 1 to 3 grams per day. Other estimates say about 1.5 tablespoons per day, but either way, that's a very small percentage of our food intake. And another point that I really want to stress here is that supplements are not always better. Often we hear about a good nutrient or a good chemical and we make a supplement and start taking supplements, but the problem here with phytonutrients is that they work in symphony and in harmony together. They have synergistic properties. So if you isolate them, they're not going to work as effective, and you also run a risk of overdosing on that one nutrient. An example of this is the beta-carotene family, where studies have actually shown that if you take beta-carotene supplement, it can actually increase your risk of cancer, whereas the beta-carotene inside of a food is going to lower your risk for cancer. So the key here is really to eat the rainbow and eat fresh and whole foods. So here are the most common groups of phytonutrients. You have first of all the alkaloids. A lot of drugs come from this grouping. For example, digoxin, which we talked about earlier. It's a cardiovascular drug which comes from the foxglove plant. There's also morphine, which comes from the poppy plant. The next group is the carotenoids. Then there's the glycosides, the phenols, including the flavonols, the phytoestrogens, the sulfides, and the terpenoids. And there are more groupings, but these are just the more well-known groups. So here is a table which shows the different classifications of phytochemicals. It looks pretty complex. There are, as you can see, some main groups and then some subgroups. And we'll show you on the next slide a slightly simplified version. This is just a little easier to read, but you can see there's still many different groups of phytochemicals. Here's another quote. This is from a French author. He said, "To eat is a necessity, but to eat intelligently is an art." We'd like to look at some examples now, and the first example is going to be the carotenoid group. Some examples are beta-carotene, which has a role in eye health as well as anti-cancer properties, lycopene, which helps with heart disease and also has anti-cancer properties, as well as lutein, which also affects our eye health, for example, cataracts and macular degeneration. Some surprising sources of the carotenoids would be apricots with beta-carotene. We normally think of beta-carotene in carrots, which is true, but pound for pound, apricots have more beta-carotene than carrots. The next one is lycopene, which we associate with tomatoes, but actually watermelon has more lycopene than tomatoes when you look at it pound for pound. Lutein is known to be in green vegetables with an especially high amount in green cabbage. One important point about the carotenoid group is that they are better absorbed in our bodies when they're cooked. The problem with cooking vegetables, however, is that you can lose nutrients when you cook vegetables. So we have to have a balance in this and not just eat raw but just eat cooked. Rather, we should eat a balance of both in order to really optimize that absorption within our bodies, as well as optimizing the amount available to us. And for the carotenoid group, a good rule of thumb is that you're going to be looking for the colors red, orange, and yellow. The second example is going to be phytoestrogens. This is something that gets a lot of attention nowadays. Some examples of phytoestrogens are your flavonoids, your isoflavones, and your lignans. The sources are going to be whole grains, legumes, and soybeans. They also are in other fruits and vegetables. These are just the main sources. They can have a detoxifying effect with carcinogens and estrogen. Some especially detoxifying foods here are the cruciferous vegetables, the grapes, ginger, and leafy greens. They can be estrogen antagonists by using the receptor sites on our cells, and this has been shown to help in breast cancer and prostate cancer with bone density as well as our blood lipid profiles, so our cholesterol levels. However, especially with soy, which has a lot of these phytoestrogens, there's been a high level of concern about the hormonal and reproductive effects that soy can have. And in America currently, about 25% of U.S. babies are fed a soy infant formula, and this also has been widely studied as far as having effects hormonally on those children. The key here that I want to emphasize in the midst of all of this controversy is to have a balance. It is always a problem when we just eat one food again and again and again. Our bodies can't handle that. And I think this is also the case with soy. It has some good properties, and phytoestrogens as a whole have good properties. However, they can also be taken to the extreme on both sides. And so when we look at this, we really want to always again look at quality, whole foods, and variety. Next, we want to look at the phenols. Some examples of the phenol group are anthocyanin, capsaicin, and polyphenols. The main sources here are going to be berries, grapes, peppers, and many more really, but especially the foods with a dark color. They are known to be rich in antioxidants, and they help to clean up free radicals. Free radicals you've probably heard about. They are essentially atoms which have lost an electron, so they're very unstable, and they can have a cascading effect within our body and even reach down and affect our DNA. So what the antioxidants come and do is they essentially donate an extra electron that they have to these free radicals to stabilize them. And the antioxidants themselves do not become free radicals. So in this way, those free radicals get stabilized and the oxidative stress within our body is lowered. The phenol group also induces detoxification enzymes, It's not so much that they detoxify the body themselves, but they initiate the enzymes which do that job. The colors here are going to be the dark colors, especially blue and purple. So berries and grapes are especially rich in these phenol phytonutrients. So the next example is not a phytochemical grouping as such, but rather it's a property of many phytochemicals, and that is the bitter property. What's interesting here is that we have chemically identical cells within our taste buds as well as in our intestines, which communicate with each other. So when we eat a bitter food, our intestines get a signal and they produce what's called GLP-1, which is glucagon-like peptide 1, which is an insulin regulator. This insulin regulator is actually used as a diabetic medication. And this bitter sensation is started by amino acids, by protein, and by other bitter foods, for example, a bitter herb. They have studied patients who are taking GLP-1 medications, and they can correlate those medications or that hormone with a lower BMI or body mass index and with weight loss. And what's interesting here also is they have studied people who dislike bitter food, and they have shown that those who dislike bitter food tend to have a higher BMI or body mass index. So it seems that there's a correlation here between eating bitter foods, regulating your insulin, and lowering your weight. In contrast to this is that sweet-only foods which are only sweet without that bitter flavor, they stimulate other cells within our intestines, which stimulate the hormone called resistin, which communicates with our fat tissues and can raise our LDL or our bad cholesterol. So with this, we can really see that two different phytochemicals, the sweet or the bitter, can have a direct effect on our insulin and our body weight. Another point that I really want to bring out right now is that we need to eat foods in their most natural state. An example of this is the anthocyanin and resveratrol, which are a part of the phenol group. They are found in peanut skins and grape skins. They're known to have a lot of antioxidant effects, and they also have an effect on the cardiovascular health. They're found in grape juice, grapes, and wine. And what's interesting here is that the bioavailability is actually higher in grape juice than in wine. However, my philosophy would be to eat it in its most natural state, especially since these phytochemicals are found in the skins. Why not eat the whole grape? And what's interesting in this whole question about antioxidants in wine and in different foods is we have to see this in balance, and I want to show this in the next slide. In this slide, it shows how much of a particular food you would have to eat in order to get the therapeutic dose of 1 gram per day of resveratrol. Now, keep in mind that 1 gram per day is a therapeutic dose, so it's quite high. But this diagram just puts it into perspective because it's so easy to hype up one particular antioxidant and we think that that's going to be our cure-all. But in reality, to get these amounts that have been thought of as being the therapeutic value, you'd have to eat 52 kilos or kilograms of tomatoes or 33,000 kilograms of peanuts, which obviously is not realistic. This is per day. So it's definitely not realistic. So I think we have to see everything in a balanced picture and eat foods in their whole state, in variety, and trust that the foods that are in nature will provide the nutrients that we need when we combine them wisely and when we eat them in their natural state. And as we mentioned, these phytonutrients are often in the peeling. For example, the resveratrol and the anthocyanins were in the peeling of the grape. And that's the case with most foods. Most phytonutrients are in the peeling. And this is unfortunate in our society today. We often prefer the peeled foods, but in reality, we're just throwing away most of the nutrients. An example of this is apples, which have quercetin, as well as several other phytonutrients within the peeling. Quercetin is good for our lung function and it helps with asthma, but it's only found in the peeling of the apple. And if we throw it away, then we lose that nutrient. Some other examples of phytonutrients are the terpene group. Some sources of this are the citrus oils, garlic, and cherries. They have anti-cancer effects. They're the organosulfur group. Sources here are going to be cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli and kale and cabbage, as well as garlic, leek, and onion. They detoxify carcinogens such as nitrates. There are also the phytosterols. The sources here are going to be vegetable oils, nuts, and seeds. They decrease colon cancer and cholesterol levels. Here's another quote. This one's from Leonardo da Vinci. He said, "Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do." So what does this mean in daily practice? Here in America, including French fries and ketchup, only 12% of Americans eat the recommended daily intake of fruit, and only 9% of Americans eat the recommended daily intake of vegetables, and that's including the processed foods like French fries and ketchup. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, most of this is highly processed, with currently about 60% of the American diet being the highly processed foods, which are no longer in their natural state. So what can we do about this? To answer that question, I'm going to use two cliches that we have. First of all, knowledge is power. And second of all, eat your vegetables. Here is a handy chart which just shows some of the main phytonutrients, their benefits on our health, and where we can find them. And this is just another way of looking at the same chart. So what's the take-home message from this presentation? First and foremost, it's that 5 servings of fruits and vegetables is a bare minimum. That's the recommended daily intake here in America, but countless studies have shown that our risk for cardiovascular disease, cancer, and death can be significantly lowered if we eat more. For example, 600 to 800 grams per day is about 7 to 10 servings. And one study even showed that 10 servings a day could help save 7.8 million lives per year. In order to reach this goal, we have to be creative. We need a lot of variety, and we need courage to try new foods. Try a red pepper one day and a green pepper the next day. We need lots of color. We need to eat the rainbow. We also should emphasize quality and fresh foods. The more healthy our soil is, the more nutrients are going to be in our foods. And this brings us to the question of organic. We should eat organic whenever possible for 2 reasons. One, obviously we're not exposing ourselves to the pesticides. And the second point is that these phytonutrients are created by the plants as a defense mechanism. If the plants are over-fertilized and have no pests as a danger to them, then they don't have that need of creating the phytonutrients. So they have naturally less phytonutrients when they are conventionally grown because they don't have that danger factor of the pests. We also need to balance our raw versus our cooked foods for optimum absorption. We should really, in this sense, also have a variety in our diet. And the last point, which I really want to stress here, is that we need to enjoy our food. If we're stressed and worried even about our food and our nutrition uptake, That shuts down our digestive system because it starts the cortisol and the adrenaline flowing in our bodies, which turns off our digestive system and inhibits the absorption of those nutrients that we're so worried about. So yes, all of these points are extremely important. We should have a variety. We should put thought into our food, but we should never lose our joy in it. To end our presentation, I'd like to finish off with 2 quotes. The first one is from Buddha. He said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." And the next one is from the Bible. It says, "Dear friend, I wish above all things that you will be in health."